Okay, in the previous Reality Bender videos, we've already established the archaeological evidence for the reality and accuracy of the Bible. We've also established the reality of accurate biblical prophecy foretelling future world history. But now I want to open people's minds as to why, far from discrediting the Bible, modern scientific discoveries and increased knowledge of the universe we live in has actually made the Bible much more credible and understandable to today's modern world than it was when its documents were first penned. But first, you have to rid yourself of the encrusted barnacles of erroneous church, denominational, and theological traditions that have attached themselves to it over the centuries. I'm not going to do an exhaustive expose of the whole Bible, you'll be pleased to hear. Instead, I'm going to give you some rather large and meaty chunks of food for thought to chew over and digest. Hopefully as an appetizer that might encourage you to reread the Bible with new eyes and a new appreciation for what the Lord is trying to let you know. What is the very first startling revelation of the Bible missed by so many? It's in the very first sentence, and it's this: extraterrestrials exist. Now, don't get hung up on big bug-eyed green monsters. Extraterrestrial is just a Latin way of saying not from the earth. How do we know they are extraterrestrial? Because they existed before the earth existed, and therefore cannot be from the earth. They can only be from somewhere that is beyond and before the earth. It also declares that there is more than one of these extraterrestrials. In fact, it declares there's a great many of them, and that before the flood some were physically present on the earth, intermarrying with the daughters of men and bearing children. Whenever we see the word God or the word gods in the Old Testament, it's the same Hebrew word, Elohim. It is both singular and plural, in the same way that the word man can be either singular or plural. It refers not only to the Father of all Elohim, the one true Elohim, Yahweh himself, but to all Elohim whom the Bible calls the sons of God. Elohim is not just a being, it's a type of being. Man is a being of flesh and blood. Elohim are beings of what the Bible calls in English spirit. That is why Jesus Christ called himself not only the Son of Man, but also the Son of God, for he walked on this earth as both flesh and blood man and as Elohim. Okay, let's jump on a bit to the flood of Noah, which is another interesting revelation from the Lord. What it tells us is that the whole purpose of creation is the salvation of man, not the salvation of the earth on which he stands. The flood makes it abundantly clear the Lord is well prepared to destroy the earth and all in it in order to save man, but not just any man. In Noah and his family alone did the Lord find something worth saving. The Lord has revealed to mankind that he is not about the business of saving the planet or the environment, or that every person will be saved. The Lord is about the business of selecting who will be saved. And there's a very good reason for this, and I'll clarify that later. But in the meantime, remember how Noah and his family were saved when all else perished. You see, the Lord does not only use spoken parables to reveal the truth. He also uses what we might term parables of history. Many of the events of the Bible are actually a type of preparation lesson about what is still to come. The flood of Noah is one of them. But let's skip forward now to one of perhaps the greatest parables of history. That is Exodus. Have you ever stood back and considered this as a parable of the second coming of Christ? Here we find the Israelites living in bondage in Egypt, a people in Egypt but who are not of Egypt. Sound familiar? A people struggling to maintain an identity and faith in a place intent on destroying both. Then there is one born twice, once as an Israelite and once on the banks of the Nile as an Egyptian. Moses. Moses leaves Egypt for a very long time, only to return many years later with great power and authority as a prophet of the Lord and the anointed leader of the Israelites. Not to rule Egypt as he once might have had the opportunity, not to save Egypt, but to lead his people out of Egypt to another place altogether, a new land, a promised land. Salvation for the Israelites was not to remain in Egypt and establish a kingdom in Egypt, even for 1,000 years. It was to leave Egypt behind altogether and follow Moses to a new place. This mass exodus of non-Egyptians out of the only world that they had known except as ancient history was preceded by a whole heap of prophesied disasters against Egypt. The Egyptians were given fair warning that these people they held captive did not belong to them. They belonged to the Lord, and the Lord will have them rescued, will have them saved. They may have been in Egypt, but they were not of Egypt. They did not belong to Egypt or to the king of Egypt. They belonged to another, one who is prepared to destroy Egypt for the salvation of his people. But understand, Passover and salvation did not depend on the nationality or genetics of your birth, or what you called yourself. It depended solely on obeying the word and command of the Lord given through Moses. Okay, let's do a big skip now to the New Testament, where we find Jesus identifying himself as both the Son of Man and the Son of God, as both man and Elohim. What else did Jesus make known about himself many times? He declared that he was not of this world. And what did Jesus tell his disciples on the night of the Last Supper? But understand that the word translated as mansions does not mean big fancy houses. It simply means places of abode or places to live, and is not the Father's house the whole of the universe? Jesus did not say, I will return to rule the earth. He said, I will return to take you to the place I have prepared for you, the place I went to prepare for you. And how did they see Jesus leave? He ascended up from the earth. He left the earth to go and prepare the place he will take us to. But it is a place flesh and blood cannot inherit, a place flesh and blood cannot go. It is a place prepared not for man, but for Elohim. That is why in the twinkling of an eye we will be changed, no longer flesh and blood, but as the angels, as the Elohim. But only those who are prepared to submit to Jesus and obey the laws and walk in the ways of the Elohim, the ways of the Spirit. Which brings me now, in a way, back to the historical parable of Noah. John in Revelation did not explain what he saw and heard. He described what he saw and heard. But how do you describe something the world has never seen before? What do you call it? What do you liken it to? The only thing John could liken the New Jerusalem to was a city. But what he described was not any city like the world had ever known. It was an impossible city, a city far beyond the wildest stretch of imagination. John saw this thing, not on the ground, but in the air, not coming down on this earth, but out of a new heavens onto a new earth. What was it that John saw? He describes it as a huge, bright, shiny, crystalline and metallic-looking cube, as long and wide as it is high. It had a base, a foundation, and its doors described as pearls. Now, does this mean they were round or semi-spherical? I'm not sure. But how big was this cube? John was surprisingly specific. Now, I say surprisingly because it's not a figure you would pluck from imagination, nor is it a figure you would pick if you wanted somebody to believe you. This flying, metallic, and crystalline cube is 2,200 kilometers long, 2,200 kilometers wide, and 2,200 kilometers high. This makes it roughly the size of the moon. It's not an object that would fit on the surface of the earth, or even in its biosphere. Now, I expect John called it a city because that's the largest manufactured thing he had to compare it to. I wonder what he would have called it today. But understand, the Bible actually says these things. So the question is, are you prepared to bend your concept of reality to fit the word of the Lord himself, or will you bend the word of the Lord to fit your concept of reality? Who will you believe? The word of the Lord or the word of somebody else? It's your choice to make.